March 15, 1995, Miami Beach. Elena Vasquez had 48 hours to find Griselda Blanco's son before the cocaine godmother declared war on half of Miami. Someone had taken 19-year-old Michael Corleone Sepulveda from his mother's Bal Harbor penthouse. Left behind a single message written in blood: the Queen's move. Elena knew cartels. She'd spent 12 years tracking their money, their roots, their revenge, but this felt different, personal. What she discovered in the next 7 days didn't just shock America. It shattered everything the DEA thought they knew about their own people. Emergency meetings in Washington, 3 agents dead, and a conspiracy that reached so deep they buried the entire case file. For 28 years, Elena carried that secret. Until yesterday, when the same message appeared again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She picked up the Polaroid again, studying the grainy image under her desk lamp. The kid couldn't be more than 17, zip-tied to a metal chair, blindfold covering half his face. But she recognized the jawline, the defiant tilt of his chin even in captivity. Michael Corleone Sepulveda's son, had to be. The message on the back was written in the same block letters she remembered from '95, the Queen's move. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee. 28 years since she'd first seen those words, and her body still responded like she was back in that blood-soaked warehouse in Hialeah, stepping over shell casings and trying not to vomit from the stench of death and gunpowder. Her secure phone buzzed. Only 5 people had the number. Vasquez. Elena, it's Marcus. Detective Marcus Rodriguez, Miami-Dade homicide, one of the few cops she still trusted. We got a situation. Body turned up in the bay this morning. Michael Sepulveda. Elena's stomach dropped. Michael's dead? Looks like execution. Single shot back of the head, dumped near Star Island maybe 12 hours ago. But here's the thing, there's something you need to see. 20 minutes later, Elena stood on the dock at Miami Beach Marina, watching the medical examiner's team load a body bag into their van. The salt air couldn't mask the smell of death that clung to her clothes from previous crime scenes, previous cases that had gone sideways. Marcus approached, latex gloves still on, holding an evidence bag. Found this in his jacket pocket. Elena's blood went cold. Another Polaroid. This one showed a different angle of the same tied-up teenager, but with today's newspaper visible in the frame. Fresh, current. Who else knows about this, she asked. Just me and the me. Figured you'd want first look given your history with the family. Marcus studied her face. This connected to that old case you never talk about? Elena pocketed the evidence bag before Marcus could object. What old case? Elena, I need 48 hours, Marcus. Don't file the report yet. You know I can't. The kid in this photo dies if this goes through channels. Elena's voice carried the weight of someone who'd already watched too many people die because bureaucracy moved slower than bullets. You remember the Medellin situation in '97? How many bodies we pulled out of the river because someone leaked to the wrong person? Marcus grimaced. He'd been a rookie then, still believed internal affairs actually investigated internal affairs. 48 hours. Then this goes official whether you like it or not. Elena drove south toward Little Havana, the Polaroids burning a hole in her jacket pocket. The neighborhoods blurred, past gentrified Coral Gables giving way to the painted murals and cigar shops of Calle Ocho. She'd worked these streets for over a decade, back when the DEA actually cared about stopping drugs instead of managing political optics. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Ms. Vasquez. The voice was electronically distorted, but she could hear amusement underneath the digital scrambling. I trust you received my package. Elena pulled over, hands gripping the steering wheel. Who is this? Someone who remembers you. Someone who knows you never could let sleeping dogs lie. A pause. The boy has 72 hours. Unless you want him to join his father at the bottom of Biscayne Bay. What do you want? The same thing I wanted in 1995, your silence, permanently this time. The line crackled with electronic static. You had your chance to walk away, Elena. Should have stayed retired. The call ended. Elena sat in her car outside Domino Park watching elderly Cuban men argue over their games, their voices carrying the rhythm of a homeland most would never see again. Normal people living normal lives, oblivious to the fact that somewhere in this city, a teenager was counting down his final hours because she'd never been able to leave the past buried. She pulled out her laptop and opened the encrypted files she'd kept hidden for 28 years. Case notes the DEA had ordered destroyed. Witness statements that had mysteriously disappeared. Financial records showing money flowing from cartel accounts to federal agent bank accounts. and photos of 3 dead agents who'd gotten too close to the truth. Elena Vasquez lit another cigarette and began making calls to people who owed her favors from a different lifetime. The hunter was back, which meant she had to become the hunter too. Time to find out who inside the DEA had just declared war on the wrong former analyst. The fourth call connected. Jesus Christ, Elena. Haven't heard from you in what, 5 years? Jimmy Castellanos had been her asset coordinator back when she was running intelligence on the Medellin pipeline. Now he sold insurance in Aventura and coached Little League on weekends. Please tell me this is about a high school reunion or something normal people talk about. I need a favor, Jimmy. A long pause. She could hear a television in the background, cartoon voices singing about friendship. My daughter's watching SpongeBob. She's 8, thinks Daddy sells boring paperwork to boring people. I'd like to keep it that way. Someone's going to die if I can't stop. Jimmy's voice hardened. I know that tone. That's your the world's ending tone. You used it right before Ramirez got his throat cut. Right before that whole shitstorm in Homestead that put 3 agents in the hospital. Elena watched an old woman feed pigeons from a park bench, her arthritic hands scattering breadcrumbs with practiced precision. Such a simple act of kindness in a world that felt increasingly poisoned by old sins. This is different. It's always different. And it always ends the same way, Jimmy sighed. What do you need? Access to personnel files from '95, specifically anyone who had clearance on Operation White Queen. Elena, those files were sealed. Even if I could, your daughter. Elena hated herself for saying it. What's her name? Don't. Isabella, right? Takes dance classes at that studio on Miracle Mile? Elena closed her eyes, remembering the photo Jimmy had shown her at a retirement party 3 years ago. A little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, spinning in a pink tutu. Beautiful kid. Looks just like her mother. You threatening my family now? That's where we are? I'm telling you that whoever killed Michael Sepulveda this morning won't hesitate to tie up loose ends, and anyone who helped investigate White Queen back in the day qualifies as a loose end. Elena crushed her cigarette under her heel. This isn't about favors anymore, Jimmy. This is about staying alive long enough to see Isabella's next recital. 20 minutes later, she was driving toward her apartment in Coconut Grove, Jimmy's promise to send encrypted files rattling around her head alongside the voice from the phone call. Should have stayed retired. Maybe he was right. Maybe she should have bought that little cottage in Key Largo like she'd always planned, spent her remaining years fishing for tarpon and pretending she'd never seen the inside of a cartel torture house. But retirement was a luxury for people who hadn't spent 15 years living with ghosts. Elena parked outside her building, a converted Art Deco hotel from the 1940s that had seen better decades. The lobby still smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams, despite the fresh coat of paint the landlord applied every few years to justify raising the rent. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, muscle memory guiding her past the doors of neighbors she barely knew. Mrs. Chen from 3B, who played violin at dawn and never complained about Elena's insomnia-fueled pacing. The college kid in 3D who left textbooks stacked outside his door and always smiled when they passed in the hallway. Normal people. Safe people. The kind of people who didn't deserve to become collateral damage in a war that had started before some of them were born. Elena unlocked her apartment and stepped into the careful sanctuary she'd built for herself. No photos on the walls, photographs were evidence, and evidence got people killed. No personal documents lying around. Nothing that couldn't be abandoned in 10 minutes if someone came knocking with more than a warrant. But there were small comforts. A reading chair by the window where she could watch the bay. Books stacked on every surface mysteries mostly, where justice actually prevailed and the guilty got caught. A kitchen where she made strong coffee and stronger drinks, depending on the time of day and the weight of old memories. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet from a pizzeria that had closed 5 years ago, was a single photograph. Elena and Marcus at his wedding, both of them younger and stupider, and still believing they could save the world one bust at a time. Marcus in his dress uniform. Elena in a blue dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion and never worn again. She touched the photo with one finger, remembering how Marcus had insisted she be in the wedding party despite barely knowing his bride. Your family, he'd said. Fucked up, dangerous family, but family. Elena poured 3 fingers of bourbon and settled into her chair. Outside, Miami sparkled in the afternoon sun like a postcard from paradise. Sailboats dotted Biscayne Bay, carrying tourists and locals who had no idea that somewhere in this beautiful, corrupt city, a teenager was zip-tied to a chair, counting down his final hours. Her laptop chimed. Jimmy's files were coming through. Time to hunt ghosts before they killed the living. Agent Daniel Morrison, lead investigator, Operation White Queen. Status, active. The coffee mug slipped from her fingers, ceramic shattering against the hardwood floor. Morrison wasn't just active according to Jimmy's files, he'd been promoted. Twice, currently serving as Deputy Assistant Director of the Miami Field Office. Her hands shook as she pulled up his photo. 28 years had added gray to his temples and lines around his eyes, but she'd recognize that face anywhere. The same man who'd stood in that Hialeah warehouse, calmly stepping over bodies while she vomited in the corner. The same man who'd told her the witness statements had been misfiled and the financial records had suffered database corruption. The same man whose voice she'd heard on the phone 3 hours ago, electronic distortion or not. Elena's secure phone rang. Marcus. "We got a problem," he said without preamble. "Just got word from downtown. The Sepulveda case is being transferred to federal jurisdiction. Effective immediately." On whose authority? Deputy Assistant Director Daniel Morrison says it's connected to ongoing cartel investigations. Marcus paused. "You know him?" Elena stared at Morrison's personnel photo on her laptop screen. Distinguished, respected, 28 years of climbing the ladder while bodies piled up in his wake. "We've met. Elena, there's something else. The evidence from this morning, including those photos, they're gone. Transferred to federal lockup for analysis." Jesus Christ. Gets better. "Morrison's putting together a joint task force. Wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. Says your expertise on the Blanco organization could be valuable." Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He wants to meet with me. 9 a.m. Federal Building. I'm supposed to escort you personally." Marcus's voice carried a warning. "Elena, whatever history you have with this guy, be careful. He's got juice, real juice. The kind that makes inconvenient people disappear into federal holding cells while their lawyers spend months fighting paperwork." After Marcus hung up, Elena sat in her chair watching the sun set over Biscayne Bay. Morrison wasn't just covering his tracks, he was hunting her. Had been hunting her since the moment she'd received that first Polaroid. This whole thing was a setup. Michael's murder, the kidnapped grandson, the mysterious phone call. Morrison had orchestrated it all to draw her out of retirement and into a trap. But why now? What had changed after 15 years of silence? Her laptop chimed with an incoming message. Encrypted, routed through 3 proxy servers. She almost deleted it unread, but something made her hesitate. The sender ID was a string of numbers she recognized. 10-15-95. October 15th, 1995. The day everything went wrong. The message contained a single line of text and an attachment. "Elena, they know you kept copies. Get out, now. A friend." The attachment was a surveillance photo taken today outside the marina where she'd met Marcus. High resolution, professional quality. The kind of photo that came from federal surveillance equipment. In it, Elena was clearly visible examining the evidence bag containing the Polaroid. Someone had been watching. Someone with access to DEA resources. But the message troubled her more than the photo. "They know you kept copies." Only 3 people had known she'd saved files from Operation White Queen. Jimmy, who'd helped her encrypt them. Marcus, who'd helped her smuggle them out of the federal building 15 years ago. And Morrison, who'd ordered them destroyed in the first place. Elena's blood went cold. If Morrison knew about the files, he knew she had evidence of everything. The money transfers, the witness statements, the photos of dead agents who'd gotten too close to the truth. Evidence that could unravel 28 years of carefully constructed lies and put a decorated federal official in a supermax prison for the rest of his natural life. Her secure phone buzzed with a text message. "Tomorrow's meeting is a kill box. Don't come alone. M. Marcus." Warning her despite the risk to his own career, his own family. Elena stood and walked to her bedroom, pulling a go bag from beneath her bed. She'd packed it 15 years ago and updated it annually out of habit. Cash, fake ID, clean phone. Special with 2 boxes of ammunition. The tools of someone who'd always known this day might come. Outside her window, Miami glittered like a jewelry display, beautiful and seductive and hiding monsters in its shadows. She'd spent half her life in this city, chasing ghosts through Little Havana and Coconut Grove, watching dealers and killers and corrupt officials dance their deadly ballet while innocent people paid the price. But she'd never been the primary target before. Never been the one with a bull's eye painted on her back. Elena finished packing and poured another bourbon, this time drinking it. Tomorrow morning she would walk into Morrison's trap because that kidnapped teenager was still out there counting down his final hours. But she wouldn't walk in blind. Time to remind a corrupt federal official why Elena Vasquez had never closed a case she couldn't solve. The war Morrison wanted was about to begin. The thought lasted exactly 30 seconds before her phone rang. Jimmy Castellanos, voice tight with panic. "Elena, Jesus Christ, what did you get me into?" He was whispering like someone might be listening. "2 agents just left my house. Said they were conducting a routine security review of personnel files from the 90s. Routine my ass, they knew exactly which files to ask about." "What did you tell them?" "What do you think I told them? That I sell insurance and coach Little League and don't know shit about old DEA operations." A pause, and she could hear him lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "But Elena, they weren't really asking. They were fishing, like they already knew the answers and wanted to see if I'd lie." "Where's Isabella?" "At my sister's. Sent Maria and the kid there this afternoon, told them it was a surprise visit." Jimmy exhaled smoke and fear in equal measure. These weren't field agents, Elena. These were internal affairs, the kind that investigate other agents, the kind that make people disappear into administrative limbo. After Jimmy hung up, Elena tried Marcus's number, straight to voicemail. She tried his work line, his personal cell, even the landline at his house. Nothing. Marcus Rodriguez, who answered his phone at 3 a.m. when crackheads found bodies in dumpsters, wasn't answering. The quiet inner fear she'd been suppressing since yesterday erupted into full panic. Morrison wasn't just cleaning house. He was burning it down. Anyone who'd been connected to Operation White Queen, anyone who might have knowledge or evidence or even suspicions, was being systematically isolated. She pulled up the encrypted files again, but this time looking for patterns instead of names. 23 agents had worked White Queen in some capacity. 13 were now dead officially from various causes, ranging from car accidents to heart attacks to that unfortunate boating incident that took Agent Ramirez in '98. 5 had transferred to field offices in places like Omaha and Billings, career dead ends where they couldn't cause trouble. 3 had taken early retirement. That left 2, Elena herself and Marcus. Elena grabbed her jacket and headed for the door, then stopped. Going to Marcus's house would be walking into whatever trap Morrison had set. But staying here meant abandoning the only ally she had left, the only person who'd stuck his neck out to warn her about tomorrow's meeting. She compromised by driving to the Starbucks 6 blocks from Marcus's neighborhood, parking where she could see the street that led to his house. If federal surveillance was watching his place, she'd spot the vehicles. If Marcus was home and safe, she'd see lights, movement, some sign that her paranoia was getting the better of her judgment. What she saw instead made her stomach clench. Marcus's house was dark except for a single light in the kitchen window. His unmarked police car sat in the driveway, but there was no sign of his personal vehicle, the restored '68 Camaro he babied like a favorite child. And parked across the street, trying to look casual, was a black Suburban with government plates. Elena's secure phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your friend is fine. For now. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Come alone or he joins the others. The others." Elena knew exactly what that meant, and it wasn't just Michael Sepulveda floating in Biscayne Bay. She drove back toward downtown, her mind racing through options that all led to the same conclusion. Morrison had spent 28 years building his position, his reputation, his network of protection inside the federal bureaucracy. He had resources, authority, and the kind of institutional backing that made inconvenient people disappear into the system. All Elena had were encrypted files that would be dismissed as forgeries and the word of a washed-up ex-analyst with a reputation for chasing conspiracy theories. In any rational calculation, Morrison held all the cards. But Elena had learned something in her years working Miami's underworld that Morrison had apparently forgotten. Sometimes the person with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous player at the table. She pulled into the parking garage of a 24-hour diner in Little Havana, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and the cameras had been broken since the Clinton administration. In the fluorescent glow of the overhead lights, surrounded by the ghosts of 30 years' worth of bad decisions, Elena Vasquez began planning how to walk into Morrison's kill box and somehow walk back out alive. The war had already begun, Time to remind a corrupt federal official that she'd been fighting wars since before he learned how to bury bodies. Elena ordered black coffee and claimed a corner booth where she could watch both entrances. The diner smelled like grease and desperation, filled with the kind of people who lived in Miami's margins: night shift workers, insomniacs, and others who had reasons to avoid daylight scrutiny. She spread Morrison's personnel file across the sticky Formica table, studying 28 years of careful career advancement, decorated service in the drug war, commendations from 3 different administrations, a reputation for getting results in impossible situations. What the file didn't show were the bodies. Agent Sarah Chen, who'd been asking questions about missing evidence funds before her fatal car accident in '97, Agent Mike Torres, whose heart attack at 35 had coincided with his discovery of phantom informant payments, Agent Lisa Park, who drowned during a routine surveillance operation after expressing concerns about Operation White Queen's real objectives. Elena had attended their funerals, watching Morrison deliver eulogies with the perfect mixture of grief and determination. The grieving supervisor, honoring fallen heroes while secretly calculating which investigative threads died with them. Her hands shook as she remembered Sarah Chen's funeral. Morrison had stood at the graveside, tears streaming down his face, while Sarah's mother clutched the folded flag like a lifeline. Elena had believed those tears were real, had actually comforted Morrison afterward, sharing her own grief over losing a promising young agent. She'd been so fucking naive. The encrypted phone buzzed, a message from the same anonymous sender as before, the one who'd warned her about the surveillance photo. This time it contained a single word and an address: tonight. The address was in Coral Gables, an upscale neighborhood where federal officials and cartel lawyers sometimes lived as neighbors, maintaining the polite fiction that their professional relationship didn't extend to backyard barbecues. Elena recognized the street, Morrison's house. She drove through Coral Gables' manicured perfection, past Spanish colonial mansions and perfectly maintained lawns, thinking about the cost of silence. 28 years ago, she'd been young enough to believe that buried evidence was a temporary necessity, that justice delayed wasn't necessarily justice denied. She'd told herself the system would self-correct, that eventually someone else would ask the right questions and force the right answers. Instead, she'd watched Morrison transform from a corrupt agent into a corrupt supervisor, into a corrupt administrator, each promotion buying him deeper protection while more bodies accumulated in his wake. Her silence hadn't just enabled his crimes, it had made them possible. Morrison's house sat behind electronic gates and professionally landscaped gardens, the kind of property that required a federal salary plus significant supplemental income. Elena parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, using shadows and muscle memory from surveillance operations that felt like another lifetime. The house was dark except for a single light in what appeared to be a home office. Elena made her way around the perimeter, noting security cameras, motion sensors, and the kind of hardened defensive measures that went beyond standard federal protection. Through the office window, she could see Morrison sitting at a desk, talking on the phone. Even through glass and distance, his body language radiated the confidence of someone who believed he controlled every variable in a complex equation. Behind him, on the office wall, Elena could see photographs. Morrison with various political figures over the years, documenting his rise through the federal hierarchy. Morrison receiving commendations. Morrison at retirement parties for agents whose deaths he'd orchestrated. And in the center of the wall, a group photo from Operation White Queen. Elena recognized her younger self standing next to Marcus, both of them still stupid enough to believe in the job. Sarah Chen smiled from the front row 3 months before her fatal accident. Mike Torres had his arm around Lisa Park, both of them dead within 18 months. Morrison had kept a trophy wall of his victims, displayed like hunting prizes in his private sanctuary. Elena's rage was so complete it felt like drowning. 28 years of buried guilt erupted into something pure and focused, burning away fear and doubt and leaving only terrible clarity. Morrison hadn't just killed those agents. He'd stolen their dedication, their sacrifice, their belief that the work meant something. He'd perverted everything they'd died for into a monument to his own corruption. She photographed the wall through the window, capturing Morrison's collection of victims with the same digital precision he'd used to document their deaths. Evidence that would mean nothing in court but everything to the families who'd never learned the truth about their losses. Morrison ended his phone call and turned toward the window. For a moment, Elena thought he'd spotted her, but his expression remained calm as he walked to a filing cabinet and removed a thick folder. Elena recognized the folder from 30 years of nightmares. Operation White Queen case files, the real ones, not the sanitized versions that had been officially preserved. Everything Morrison had supposedly destroyed was sitting in his home office like a loaded weapon. Her secure phone vibrated with an incoming call. Morrison's number. "I know you're out there, Elena." His voice carried across the phone line and through the window, creating a surreal doubling effect. "Did you enjoy the trophy wall? I've always been proud of that collection." "You're fucking insane." "I'm practical. Those agents died because they couldn't accept that the war on drugs required compromises. They wanted to arrest everyone, prosecute everyone, pretend that moral purity was more important than strategic necessity." Morrison opened the White Queen file, revealing photographs of crime scenes Elena had spent 15 years trying to forget. "You were smarter. You understood that sometimes good people have to do terrible things for the greater good. The greater good didn't require murdering federal agents, didn't it?" Morrison held up a photograph of the Hialeah warehouse where everything had gone wrong. "We eliminated the Vasquez cartel's leadership, disrupted their supply lines, and prevented approximately 400 kilos of cocaine from reaching American streets. Sarah Chen wanted to investigate our informant payments, which would have exposed our sources and destroyed 5 years of intelligence gathering. Mike Torres was asking questions about financial irregularities that would have compromised ongoing operations. They chose ideology over results." Elena watched Morrison's face through the window, seeing no remorse, no recognition that he'd become the very monster he'd sworn to fight. "What about Marcus? What compromises require kidnapping a police detective?" "Marcus knows about the copies you made, the encrypted files you've been hiding for 15 years. Morrison closed the file and looked directly at her through the window. "Tomorrow morning you give me those files and disappear quietly. Marcus will be returned safely and the kidnapped boy will be released. Everyone goes home happy. And if I refuse," Morrison smiled and Elena felt something cold settle in her chest, "then you'll discover that some prices are too high to pay, even for people with nothing left to lose." The line went dead. Elena stood in Morrison's perfectly manicured garden, surrounded by the smell of jasmine and corruption, understanding finally that tomorrow's meeting was never meant to be a negotiation. It was meant to be an execution. Elena stared at Morrison's dark windows for a long moment, then retreated to her car. But instead of driving home, she found herself pulling into the parking lot of a 24-hour pharmacy 3 blocks away. Her hands shook as she dialed Marcus's home number one more time, praying for his voice, his laugh, anything to prove her worst fears wrong. The call went straight to voicemail. Again. She tried his partner at Miami PD, Detective Ray Santos. He answered on the second ring, groggy but alert. "Santos. Ray, it's Elena Vasquez. I'm looking for Marcus. Have you seen him?" A pause. "Elena? Jesus. What time is it?" Papers rustling. "Marcus took personal leave yesterday. Said he had family business to handle." "Why? Family business?" "Marcus, who was divorced with no kids, whose parents had died years ago. Marcus, whose only family was the badge and the job and the few friends stupid enough to care about him." "Did he say anything else? Anything about where he was going?" "Just that it might take a few days." "Elena, you sound worried. Is everything okay?" Elena closed her eyes, feeling the walls of Morrison's trap closing around everyone she'd ever cared about. "If Marcus contacts you, tell him to call me immediately. And Ray, be careful who you trust." She hung up before he could ask questions she couldn't answer. Elena drove aimlessly through Miami's empty streets, her mind spinning through 15 years of carefully maintained lies. The official story of Operation White Queen, the cleaned-up case files, the convenient deaths that had eliminated inconvenient witnesses, and Marcus, who'd helped her smuggle out those encrypted files, who'd sworn he would never let Morrison bury the truth. Marcus, who'd called her after the surveillance photo arrived. Marcus, who'd known about her meeting with Detective Williams. Marcus, who'd somehow learned about Morrison's trap in time to send that warning text. Elena pulled over in a strip mall parking lot, her heart hammering against her ribs. She scrolled through the warning messages on her secure phone, studying the timestamps, the phrasing, the impossible timing of information that only Morrison should have possessed. The first message had arrived within an hour of her meeting with Jimmy Castellanos. The second had come while she was inside Morrison's house, watching him through the window. As if someone was monitoring her movements in real time, feeding her just enough information to keep her moving in the right direction, toward tomorrow's kill box. Elena's hands went cold as she opened the encrypted files again, but this time searching for something different. Not evidence of Morrison's crimes, but evidence of her own blindness. There. Marcus Rodriguez's personnel record from Operation White Queen. She'd reviewed it 100 times over the years, but always looking for signs of Morrison's corruption, never questioning Marcus's own role. Marcus had been the liaison between the DEA task force and Miami PD. Marcus had handled evidence transfers. Marcus had been present at every crucial meeting where decisions were made about witnesses, informants, and operational security. Marcus had been perfectly positioned to sabotage the investigation from inside law enforcement. Elena scrolled through the operational timeline with new eyes, and the pattern emerged like a photograph developing in acid. Every blown surveillance operation had followed briefings where Marcus was present. Every dead witness had been under police protection that Marcus had helped coordinate. Every piece of evidence that had mysteriously disappeared had passed through channels that Marcus controlled. She'd spent 15 years believing that Morrison had a source inside Miami PD feeding him information. She'd never considered that the source might be Marcus himself. Her phone buzzed with another message from the anonymous sender: "Trust no one, not even the ones you love." Elena stared at the message until her vision blurred. 28 years of partnership. 15 years of friendship after they'd both left federal service. Marcus had been the one constant in her professional life, the only person who'd shared her commitment to finding the truth about Operation White Queen. Or so she'd believed. "You arrogant bastard," she whispered to the empty parking lot, but she wasn't talking about Morrison anymore. Marcus had played the long game perfectly, the concerned partner, the loyal friend, the fellow victim of Morrison corruption, who'd helped her preserve evidence while secretly reporting her every move to the man they were supposedly investigating. Elena thought about every conversation, every shared drink, every moment when Marcus had seemed to understand her obsession with the case. How many times had he encouraged her to dig deeper while simultaneously ensuring that Morrison stayed one step ahead? How many times had he fed her just enough truth to keep her invested while steering her away from discoveries that might actually threaten their operation? The revelation reframed everything. Marcus hadn't been kidnapped. He was Morrison's insurance policy, the loyal inside man who'd spent 15 years making sure Elena Vasquez remained a manageable threat instead of a fatal one. Elena started her car with steady hands, her fear replaced by something harder and more focused. Tomorrow's meeting wasn't just Morrison's kill box. It was her chance to finally close a case that had been rigged from the beginning. She'd visited these graves every year on the anniversary of Operation White Queen, leaving flowers and whispered apologies for failing to get them justice. Now she understood the terrible truth. She hadn't failed to solve their murders. She'd actively participated in covering them up. The encrypted phone rang, Marcus's number. Elena stared at the display for 5 rings before answering. "Hello, partner." "Elena, thank God, I've been trying to reach you for hours." Marcus's voice carried the perfect mixture of relief and concern that had fooled her for 15 years. "Morrison's people grabbed me outside my apartment yesterday. I managed to get away, but they're hunting for me. We need to meet." "Where are you?" "Safe house in Hialeah, the old surveillance location from the Castellanos operation. You remember the address?" Of course she remembered. The same warehouse district where Operation White Queen had imploded, where Morrison had first revealed the depth of his corruption. Marcus was suggesting they meet at ground zero of their shared trauma, counting on nostalgia and sentiment to override her suspicion. "I remember," Elena said. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious. But Elena, I found something. Evidence that proves Morrison killed those agents. Physical proof that will put him away forever." Even now, after everything she'd discovered, part of her wanted to believe him. The part that remembered 28 years of partnership, of Marcus having her back in situations that should have killed them both. The part that had shared drinks and war stories and the kind of bond that only came from surviving hell together. What kind of evidence? Morrison kept records, financial transactions, communication logs, operational orders, everything we need to prove he orchestrated those deaths. Marcus paused, his voice dropping to the conspiratorial whisper she'd heard 1,000 times across surveillance radios. "He's been building a case file on his own crimes, Elena, like a fucking trophy collection." Elena closed her eyes, remembering Morrison's office wall. The photographs of dead agents arranged like hunting prizes, displayed with the pride of a serial killer reviewing his greatest hits. Marcus wasn't lying about the trophy collection, which meant he'd seen it himself. "We can end this," Marcus continued. "Tomorrow, when you meet with Morrison, I'll be watching from overwatch position. The moment he makes a move against you, we take him down. Justice for Sarah, Mike, Lisa, all of them. And the kidnapped boy? Morrison will have to release him once we have the evidence. He won't risk additional murder charges when he's already facing life in prison." Elena opened her eyes, studying the cemetery gates in her headlights. Marcus was offering her exactly what she'd wanted for 15 years, justice for the fallen agents, and vindication for her own obsession. The perfect resolution to a case that had defined her entire adult life, which was precisely why she couldn't trust it. "Marcus," she said quietly, "do you remember what Sarah Chen was investigating when she died?" "Financial irregularities in the informant payment system. Morrison was skimming funds and using them to pay off cartel sources. And Mike Torres? Phantom agent accounts. Morrison was creating fictional operatives to justify budget allocations." Every answer was correct. Every detail matched the classified files that only a handful of people had ever seen. Marcus wasn't guessing or improvising. He was reciting facts he'd helped create 15 years ago. "One more question," Elena said. "The night Sarah died, where were you?" A pause, too long, too careful. "Home. I was off duty." Elena felt something settle in her chest, cold and final. "No, Marcus, you were with me. We were working surveillance on the Vasquez safe house in Coral Gables. Sarah called you at 11:47 p.m. to report her discovery about the financial records. You told her to document everything and meet us at the office in the morning." The silence stretched between them, filled with 15 years of carefully constructed lies finally crumbling into truth. "She never made it to the office," Elena continued. "Her car went off the MacArthur Causeway at 2:18 a.m., and you knew she was dead before the police found the body because you called Morrison the moment she hung up." When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something professional and cold. "How long have you known?" "About an hour, maybe less." Elena surprised herself with how calm she sounded. "The anonymous messages. You've been feeding me information to keep me moving in the right direction, toward Morrison's trap." "It doesn't have to be a trap, Elena. Morrison's serious about letting you walk away. Give him the files, disappear quietly, and everyone lives. The boy goes home to his family." "And if I refuse?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried 30 years of shared history and genuine regret. "Then I'll have to choose between you and the greater good, and we both know which choice I've been making for 15 years. Elena hung up and sat in the cemetery parking lot, surrounded by the graves of people she'd failed to protect, finally understanding that tomorrow's confrontation wasn't about exposing Morrison's crimes. It was about surviving the consequences of her own willful blindness. "Bayfront Park," Morrison said without preamble. "The amphitheater, 9 o'clock. I'll be there. Elena." Morrison's voice carried something that might have been genuine regret. "This doesn't have to end badly. Give me the files and walk away. You've earned the right to a quiet retirement. Like Sarah Chen earned the right to a quiet death." The line went dead. Elena drove home to shower and change clothes, moving with the deliberate calm of someone preparing for battle. She dressed in the same charcoal suit she'd worn to federal court hearings, armor disguised as professional attire. The encrypted files went into a waterproof case. Her service weapon, carried legally under her private investigator's license, settled familiar and heavy against her ribs. At 8:45 she walked across the park toward the amphitheater, breathing salt air and watching morning joggers navigate paths where her career was about to end one way or another. Morrison sat alone on the concrete steps, looking like any other retiree enjoying the Miami sunshine. No visible security, no obvious backup. Either he was supremely confident or supremely reckless. "You came," he said as she approached. "I gave you my word." Elena sat 3 steps below him, close enough to talk, far enough to react. "Where's the boy?" "Safe. He'll be released the moment our business is concluded." Morrison studied her face with the clinical interest of a pathologist examining tissue samples. "You look tired, Elena. 15 years of carrying those files must have been exhausting." "Not as exhausting as living with what's in them." Morrison smiled, and Elena saw the predator beneath the grandfather facade. What's in those files is a successful covert operation that disrupted cartel activities and saved American lives. The fact that it required unpleasant sacrifices doesn't diminish its value. Unpleasant sacrifices. Elena let the words hang between them like an indictment. Is that what you call murdering federal agents? I call it operational necessity. Chen, Torres, and Park were going to expose intelligence sources that had taken years to develop. Their moral absolutism would have destroyed ongoing investigations and gotten more agents killed. Morrison's voice never wavered, never showed doubt or remorse. Sometimes protecting the mission requires protecting it from the people who serve it. Elena studied his face, seeing no crack in the certainty, no hint that he understood the enormity of what he'd done. This wasn't a man wrestling with difficult choices. This was a man who long ago decided that he was the only one qualified to make them. You really believe that, she said. After all these years, after all the bodies, you still think you're the hero of this story. History will judge whether I was right or wrong, but history is written by survivors, not martyrs. Morrison reached into his jacket, and Elena's hand moved instinctively toward her weapon before she saw the manila envelope in his fingers. Photographs of your apartment, your office, your favorite coffee shop, taken yesterday by professionals who could have killed you at any moment. Consider them a demonstration of good faith. Elena took the envelope without looking inside. Good faith? I'm offering you something I've never offered anyone else, a choice. Give me the files and disappear. New identity, new life, enough money to be comfortable. All you have to do is stop trying to resurrect a case that died for good reasons. And the boy goes home tonight unharmed, with a story about being kidnapped by drug dealers who panicked and released him. The family gets closure, the media gets a happy ending, and everyone moves on with their lives. Elena opened the envelope, glancing at surveillance photographs that proved Morrison's people had been watching her for days. Professional work, military precision. She was outgunned, outmanned, and outmaneuvered by people who'd been planning this confrontation since the moment she'd received that blood-stained Polaroid. But Morrison had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed that after 15 years of living with guilt and doubt, she would choose survival over justice. There's just one problem with your offer, Elena said, standing and letting the photographs scatter in the ocean breeze. I destroyed the encrypted files years ago. Morrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. I don't believe you. I realized they'd never be admissible in court. Fruit of the poisonous tree, chain of custody issues, statute of limitations problems. Even if I could prove you killed those agents, it would never result in prosecution. Elena smiled, feeling 15 years of rage crystallize into something pure and focused. So I found a better solution. Morrison's phone buzzed. Then again, he glanced at the screen, and for the first time uncertainty flickered across his features. What did you do? I sent copies to the Miami Herald, the Washington Post, and 68 other news organizations an hour ago. Everything, Morrison. Your trophy wall, your operational files, your financial records. Even if they can't put you in prison, they can make sure the whole world knows what you are. Morrison stared at his phone as message notifications continued to accumulate. His carefully constructed legend was dissolving in real time, replaced by the truth he'd spent 15 years trying to bury. You've killed us both, he whispered. Good, Elena said, and meant it. Her phone had been buzzing constantly since she'd left Morrison at the amphitheater. Voicemails from journalists, text messages from former colleagues, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. The story was spreading faster than she'd anticipated, metastasizing across social media and news networks with the viral intensity that only came from a perfect storm of corruption, violence, and federal agents gone rogue. Elena turned off the phone and sat in silence, watching strangers prepare to turn her into a public figure. In 6 hours, she'd gone from a forgotten private investigator working insurance cases to the whistleblower who'd exposed one of the DEA's darkest secrets, the woman who'd sacrificed her own safety to reveal the truth about Operation White Queen. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt empty. Morrison had disappeared from the amphitheater without another word, leaving behind only scattered surveillance photographs and the weight of 15 years finally collapsing into consequence. The boy Michael's son had been released unharmed, found walking along Flagler Street with no memory of his captors, and a story about escaping from a warehouse he couldn't locate. The family's nightmare was over, just as Morrison had promised. But Elena understood now that some victories came at a cost that made them indistinguishable from defeat. Her phone lit up with a call from Marcus. She stared at his name on the display, thinking about 28 years of partnership reduced to a single moment of clarity in a cemetery parking lot. The phone went silent, then immediately began ringing again. Marcus Rodriguez, the man who'd been her anchor through decades of federal service, calling to explain or apologize or perhaps to warn her about the consequences of destroying everything they'd both spent their lives building. Elena turned the phone face down and let it ring. The truth about Morrison would dominate news cycles for weeks. Congressional hearings would be scheduled, internal investigations launched, careers destroyed. The families of Sarah Chen, Mike Torres, and Lisa Park would finally have answers about how their loved ones had died. Justice would be served, or something that resembled it closely enough to satisfy the public appetite for moral resolution. But Marcus Rodriguez would disappear into the shadows that had hidden him for 15 years, protected by the same institutional machinery that had enabled Morrison's crimes. Too valuable to prosecute, too connected to abandon, too careful to have left evidence of his true role in Operation White Queen. He would surface somewhere else, with a different name and a different mission, carrying the knowledge that Elena Vasquez had chosen justice over loyalty. She could live with that. She had to. Elena climbed out of her car and walked toward the apartment building, ignoring the reporters who surged forward with cameras and microphones. Their questions blended into white noise. How long had she known about the corruption? Why had she waited 15 years to come forward? What did she hope to accomplish by destroying her former colleagues? She didn't answer because she couldn't explain that some truths were worth discovering even when they arrived too late to save anyone. That 15 years of carrying the weight of unsolved murders had been preferable to 15 years of living with the knowledge that she'd been complicit in covering them up. That justice delayed wasn't always justice denied. Sometimes it was just justice arriving at the moment when it could finally be endured. At her apartment door, Elena paused with her key in the lock and looked back at the circus of media attention. In a few hours, she would be famous for all the wrong reasons. The woman who'd brought down a decorated federal agent, the whistleblower who'd chosen revenge over reconciliation, the obsessive investigator who destroyed lives in pursuit of a 15-year-old grudge. They would write books about her decision to expose Morrison's crimes. Academic papers would analyze her psychological motivations. True crime podcasts would debate whether her actions constituted justice or vigilantism. None of them would understand that she'd simply reached the point where carrying the truth had become more bearable than carrying the lies. Elena unlocked her door and stepped inside, closing it behind her against the chaos she'd unleashed. In the sudden quiet of her apartment, surrounded by the case files that had defined half her adult life, she finally allowed herself to feel the weight of what she'd accomplished. It felt like grief. It felt like peace. It felt like the end of a story that had taken 15 years to tell.